Our planet is trying to tell us something, but we don't seem to be listening.
Record heat, floods and drought. What's behind the extreme weather making its way across our planet? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. Deadly heat waves scorched cities on 4 continents as the Northern Hemisphere marked the first day of summer last week. In China, Beijing issued its 3rd highest heat warning on Monday, with many other regions in northern China suffering from heat waves and droughts. At its peak, the United States saw nearly 120 million people under heat advisories, while from the Black Sea to the US Midwest, extreme weather threatens crop output. It's a sign that climate change may again help fuel record heat that in North America could surpass last summer as the warmest in 2,000 years. We begin with this report from CGTN's Poppy Imputing.
Americans have been sweltering under extreme high temperatures for days as the official start of summer arrived last Thursday. Here in Washington, D.C., the temperature peaked at 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius for the first time in 8 years. In states like Ohio, Pennsylvania and Maryland, the humidity is making it feel hotter. As temperatures begin to cool in some parts of the country, the East Coast corridor from Washington, D.C., stretching north to New York and New Jersey, is still baking. Climate experts are warning Americans to stay safe in the sweltering heat.
We always advise to limit your time outdoors or just avoid going outdoors if you don't have to. And making sure you're staying hydrated and making sure you can find adequate cooling.
And the extreme heat has brought thunderstorms to Florida, South Carolina and coastal Georgia, which according to experts is down to climate change.
Human-caused climate change also causes rainfall to be more extreme. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture. So when a storm system comes, it's dumping out much larger amounts of water. So we're seeing the kind of very heavy rainfalls that are causing the kind of flooding that we're seeing.
The scorching weather is expected to continue as the heat wave heads south towards the Carolinas and Alabama this week. Poppy Imputing, CGTN, Washington.
There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Mohammed Mahmoud is a water resources and climate adaptation expert. Tad DeLay is an assistant professor at Baltimore City Community College. His new book is Future of Denial, The Ideologies of Climate Change. Also with us is Yixing Xu. He served as the research director for Breakthrough Energy. And Mansour Almazroui focuses on the climate as a researcher and professor at King Abdulaziz University. He also serves as a member of Saudi Arabia's Shura Council, advising the government on a number of key issues. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Mansour Almazroui, let me start with you. And you've had a tragedy in Saudi Arabia over the past few weeks. At least 1,300 people have died, and this was climate-related, it was weather-related. They died during this year's Muslim pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia, known as the Hajj, and we saw temperatures in Mecca and other sacred sites there range between 46 and 49 degrees Celsius. What can you tell us about what happened?
Actually, the idea that we are in Hajj at the moment in summer, and even next year gonna be in summer. So these strategies may also continue next year. What is happening is that temperature is still around 50. This is really huge. And actually the problem is, you know, that some Haji, actually, they are not legal. They go by themselves and they walk in the street by own. And really almost 83% of them, they died in the road by heat stroke. And this is really tragedy. And this is happening actually this summer for the first time, which happened where people has no camping. And I mean, once they go for Hajj, they should follow the rule of the covenant and follow the campaign. But they don't do. They go by themselves and they walk alone. So this is what happened. About 1,300 people died. It's really tragedy. And actually the problem is actually not just only that, it's not only the heat, actually there's humidity. There is factors called heat stress, which is, you know, combination of warm air as well as humidity. And this is really happening as heat stress, where the feeling of the temperature gonna be more. This is the problem. Yes.
Mansour, we're also hearing from the American Meteorological Society that Saudi Arabia is actually a global hotspot when it comes to temperature increases, and it is experiencing one of the fastest rates of temperature increases on the planet. What's causing this?
Actually, this is the warming. Actually, the big problem that we are having, actually, this warming is really related to the global carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases. The problem is that whatever we do, that these events are going to continue in the future until 2050. We're in Arabian Peninsula, where temperature by 2050 gonna every day in summer above 50 degrees. This is really huge. The problem that we need, when we talk about COP29, they're now having what is called national adaptive plans for adaptation strategy. The COP28, they realized that they should not now focus on the mitigation, but they focus on adaptation and resilience. The problem is of the heat is going to rise more. And the problem of it is not just only that, it's going to be heating the oceans. So recently in UAE and Oman, there was a flood happening for the first time where rainfall reached about 254 degrees millimeter.
Right.
And this is why, because the heat of the warming is not just warming the land, but warming the oceans.
Right.
And this the ocean, Indian Ocean, from the south, that they happen getting floods. Now, if the projection of rainfall for the south of the Arabian Peninsula can increase by 30%. And this is just not normal rain, but floods.
Okay.
It's like flash floods. This is really dangerous. And we have to have adaptation and strategy for resilience.
Right. Mohammed Mahmoud, yes. Let's look at the wider Middle East region and North Africa as well. I mean, this is the region that is one of the most water-scarce regions in the world. And we're hearing that up to 600 million people could be exposed to what's described as super and ultra extreme temperatures, up to 56 degrees Celsius. And this kind of condition could last for several weeks. What can you tell us about these scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very dangerous start to our summer season. I mean, just as Dr. Mansour laid it out, the effects that are happening in Saudi Arabia is actually endemic of what's happening across the Middle East region. The idea that we are just now beginning in the summertime, and now we are exceeding in a lot of places what's expected usually over the trend over the last few years, the temperature thresholds. This is indicating that what we're seeing right now is no longer, these years that we're experiencing these types of extreme heat are no longer outliers. This is the trend moving forward. And I'd also add, when we tend to look at heat waves and sort of the news stories that pop up, we tend to focus at areas that maybe not prone to experiencing heat. We saw the news report of what's happening in the East Coast of the US, where places that aren't usually accustomed to hitting 100 degrees or certainly 100 degrees this early in the summer is concerning. But I would also look at other places like the Middle East, or where I currently reside, Phoenix, Arizona, in the Southwest. I believe the meteorologist was speaking from there as the canary in the coal mine, where, for example, in Phoenix, Arizona, we're used to seeing the 110s in Fahrenheit in July. We hit that earlier this month. So it's a combination of heat afflicting areas that are not conditioned to it, but also places that are accustomed to it also being pushed into new extremes.
Yixing, Hong Kong experienced its hottest summer solstice in more than 40 years. In fact, all of China has experienced rising heat and humidity over the last few decades. But we have seen something of a difference between the north and the south, and this is attributed to a phenomenon called wet bulb. What is that?
Yes. So the wet bulb temperature is a critical measure used in meteorology and climatology to understand human comfort and the potential heat stress. So high wet bulb temperatures make it very difficult for humans to cool down through sweating, leading to an increased risk of heat-related illness, such as a heat stroke. And wet bulb temperature combines both heat and humidity, making it a more comprehensive measure than just the air temperature alone. So it is particularly useful in regions with high humidity like Hong Kong, where the ability to cool down through evaporation is limited. In northern regions where humidity tends to be lower, a high temperature can still be dangerous, but the wet bulb temperature may not reach critical levels as quickly as in the southern, more humid regions. In southern regions where humidity is typically higher, even moderate temperatures can result in high wet bulb temperatures, posing significant health risks.
Tad Delay, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. Now, we're seeing that billions of people have felt the sort of deadly intensity of these climate-fueled heat waves that many people have experienced. We've seen, as I said, scorching heat on all 5 continents, or across 5 continents, I should say. And the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, he has talked about the impact fossil fuels is having on these conditions that we are seeing. Let's listen to some of what he had to say.
We are playing Russian roulette with our planet. And we need an exit ramp off the highway to climate hell. And the truth is we have control of the wheel. We must directly confront those in the fossil fuel industry who have shown relentless zeal for obstructing progress over decades. Billions of dollars have been thrown at distorting the truth, deceiving the public, and sowing doubt. Last year, the oil and gas industry invested a measly 2.5% of its total capital spending on clean energy. Doubling down on fossil fuels in the 21st century is like doubling down on horseshoes and carriage wheels in the 19th. So, to fossil fuel executives, I say, your massive profits give you the chance to lead the energy transition. Don't miss it.
So, Tad, in your book, Future of Denial, The Ideologies of Climate Change, you point to the role of ideology in what we are experiencing right now. Tell us more about that, and why are we in denial about climate change?
Yes, thank you. Yes, and certainly it is a very hot year. Last year was starting on July 3rd. We saw 36 days in a row that were hotter than any days ever measured before. And this summer seems to be running a little bit hotter. So we'll see in a few weeks if that pans out even worse. It is certainly the case that we need to be thinking about the role of ideological commitments to the systems that we find ourselves in. Ideology, if we want to define it, is an imaginary relationship to a real situation. And ideologies are housed within apparatuses, right? You enact an ideology, you reproduce it through religious institutions or unions or media or political parties. Ideology is expressed in enacted activity. What we need to have more people understand is that all 5 mass extinctions in Earth's past, as well as many of the smaller ones, tracked very closely with rises and falls in carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the temperature knob, and it is also the mass extinction knob. And we need to ask ourselves why we are not able to stop the progress of this storm. And in my book, I wager that it has something to do with the fact that on paper, fossil fuel reserves currently are worth a little over $250 trillion. They also power 4/5 of our energy, right? Such that turning them off would collapse us into a depression, right? So we are hooked on a particular relationship that we do not seem to have the material or ideological repertoire to extricate ourselves from.
And Tad, the fact that a lot of these beliefs are driven by ideology, does that make it a lot more difficult to combat, the effects of climate change?
Certainly. We traditionally think of climate denial as something that has to do with cognitive affirmation of or rejection of sciences. But that is importantly only one way that denial can function. Denial can also be moral distancing in nature, or it can accept that you know something but say, yet nevertheless, we must do this because of X, Y, and Z, right? So, for example, you increasingly find people that are accepting of the science, but look for ways out of thinking about their own moral culpability. For example, there's a company in the US that lets you pay to plant trees to offset your own breath. We have a company like Delta Airlines claiming to be carbon neutral. You can kind of go down the list and find different ways that corporations are sort of obscuring culpability and tapping into a desire for purity. But what it usually means is that corporations in the global north are simply buying up a cheap indigenous land in the global south and dispossessing people of their ancestral lands.
Mansour Almazroui, let's pick up on some of what the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said. He said that for some 80% of the world, that's 6.5 billion people, the heat we are experiencing is twice as likely to occur because we use fossil fuels. And this is what Guterres went on to say. He said, we must directly confront those in the fossil fuel industry who have shown relentless zeal for obstructing progress over decades. What do you make of that? And of course, I'm also aware that you are in a country that's one of the world's major producers of fossil fuels.
Actually, the idea of this fossil fuel is not the producer, but actually the user, which is really Europe. I mean, when we do the CO2 emissions, you'll find it's not the producer, but actually the user. We found that even some studies recently being showed that most of these fossil fuels come from Europe, not from Saudi Arabia. And the problem of these fossil fuels already, for example, Saudi Arabia is working on climate change and resilience, and also in what is called zero carbon dioxide, which is going to be in 2050. So Saudi Arabia is really working on this idea, and not just only working on by itself, but also asking for all this region. And actually, even Saudi Arabia has done many projects. One of them is called Green Initiative of the Middle East, which really, I mean, trying to reduce carbon dioxide. We have also in Saudi Arabia what's called NEOM, which is totally a carbonized city. I mean, zero carbon. It's really now building a new. We have also at the moment we have biggest plan for renewable energy. So we are going to reduce carbon dioxide in our use, and even there's some regulation for reducing carbon dioxide.
Mohammed Mahmoud, of course, it's very difficult in many instances for ordinary people, myself included, to understand this phenomenon that's taking place right now. I mean, we've seen the impact that climate change is having on disasters. It's making them a lot more intense. We look at winds from North Africa that are affecting temperatures in southern Europe right now. And scientists say the heat will ease soon in the transition from El Nino to La Nina. What does that mean?
Well, a couple of things, Anand. I mean, first of all, your original point is the fact that I think a lot of people still today underestimate the effect and impact of extreme heat. Heat is a very quick and, in some cases, silent killer. It doesn't take very much to be exposed to high temperatures and then start to get the human body into the danger zone, where organs really start to have a hard time moving blood, absorbing oxygen, etc. And people find themselves in a very dangerous situation very quickly, and unfortunately, the point of no return. In terms of the shift of heat and the change in climate indicators, this was kind of brought up in earlier conversations, but the idea is that our concern isn't just only extreme heat, which of course is the driver for a lot of these climate impacts, but coupled with that, potentially as we change climate indicators, if we're transitioning out of El Nino in the future, in the near future, is how that also potentially affects the concern over flooding that comes from these significant storm events. As was mentioned earlier, extreme heat leads to more moisture in the atmosphere, and then when we have storm patterns that move all this moisture around, now you have these very huge and significant rainfall and storm events. And so this could also be a potential consequence to worry about. So it's almost a two-pronged threat, where you're worried about extreme heat, but you're also worried about expanded flooding from very significant storm events. And we've seen that happen over the last couple of years, recently in the Arabian Peninsula, but now things are happening sooner. I mean, we are just starting the summer season, and we're seeing a whole medley of climate impacts occurring at the same time.
Tad Delay, you did an interview recently in which you said, and I'm quoting you directly here, you said, "We cannot stop the progress of the storm. This is too big. There is not a person on Earth who has the agency to stop this individually. It's not even clear to me that anybody has much agency to stop this collectively." I mean, that sounds pretty damning, doesn't it? So what is the answer?
Well, what I want to say is that we know the solutions and we also have most of the technologies that we need, right? We know how to generate energy renewably without carbon dioxide. We know how to at least nascently develop carbon capture technologies for the parts of emissions that are not directly related to energy, such as industrial processes or land use. Right, so we have the technologies, but the problem is a mode of production that incentivizes profit, right? So the problem is not, for example, one that can be simply solved by renewables becoming exponentially cheap, as they have been. Not exponentially, that's perhaps saying a bit much, right? But certainly renewables have become cost competitive, even in some cases without government subsidies, with fossil fuel production of energy, right? The problem, however, is that these sources of energy are not particularly profitable, so they are not displacing fossil fuels at anything close to the rate that we need. So more or less, while renewables are exponentially increasing in capacity, we are more or less piling them on top of existing fossil fuel infrastructure rather than using them to significantly phase down fossil fuels. Although it's important to say that fossil fuel use seems to be close to flatlining. It's just barely increasing up. So I don't want to say that there is no hope, certainly not. What I want to say is that we are captured within a capitalist mode of production that needs to exploit labor and the land. And because of the way that we organize our societies, there simply is not a huge incentive to decarbonize at the scale that we need.
Yixing, if we look at the situation here in the United States, I mean, between June 1st and June 15th, there were more than 1,200 daytime high temperature records were tied or broken in the United States. We look at Mexico, it's been experiencing droughts, water shortages, and heat. And in the U.S. state of New Mexico, we've seen fires as well as floods. I mean, how would you describe the intensity of these weather patterns that we're seeing this year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this year's weather patterns have been marked by record-breaking heat, severe drought and water shortages, rapid and extreme weather shifts. So the forecast for the next 3 months is possibly suggesting that the trend could continue, and 2024 could rival 2023 for being the hottest year on record. So these events underscore the increasing intensity and frequency of extreme weather events due to climate change, and they highlighted the urgent need for climate resilience and adaptation strategies to mitigate the impacts on human health, infrastructure, and ecosystems. We cannot wait anymore. We have to take very aggressive actions to fight climate change.
Mansour, is it fair to say that the alarming part of the heat waves that we're experiencing right now is that for many people, it's no longer seen as something out of the ordinary?
Actually, as you mentioned, that's true, because now we are actually experiencing 49, but actually the whole forecast of this month, and even in July, gonna be exceeding 50 degrees. So the people now are more accustomed now to this heat wave. It's more than before. Before we were thinking about 40, now we are talking about 50 degrees. So people are getting more customized about this heat wave.
Mohammed Mahmoud, you know, there's something that we've talked about before, you know, talking about the effect of climate change, the effect of changing weather patterns, and that is something called climate refugees. We had a report from the Norwegian Refugee Council that warns that the North Africa Mideast region is already overwhelmed by displacement crises. Are we going to see a lot more of this? And are there any measures being put in place to deal with this?
Yes, this is a very, very unfortunate outcome that we're seeing that's happening in tandem, which is, as you had mentioned, there's several conflict and crises in the Middle East that are causing displacement, certainly what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza specifically, and also what's happening in Sudan. I believe some of our reports coming in where folks that are trying to flee conflict, especially during this period, I forget the statistic, but certainly what's happening in Sudan, people fleeing north out of Khartoum, out of the war-stricken areas, unfortunately passing away en route to Egypt as they're trying to seek safe refuge. And that is a consequence of course, the difficult conditions upon which they're leading, but a lot of it is the amount, the heat that part of the world experiences, coupled with not having adequate supplies, water in their journey, traveling by foot, continuously being exposed to the sun, under these very, very uncomfortable, beyond uncomfortable heat ranges and temperatures. And unfortunately, as we see, areas that are affected by conflict and displacement and people seeking refuge from war, that's also coupled as folks that are also climate refugees. And unfortunately, I see that statistic increasing as people are being continuously displaced during this part of the year.
Yixing, I want to get back to the issue of renewable energy and green technology. I mean, China's making pretty vigorous efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change and, of course, the rise in greenhouse gases that we're seeing. It's doing so very aggressively by adopting a lot of green technology programs, also renewable energy as well. What can you tell us about these efforts and the effect it's had?
Yeah, China has been making substantial efforts to mitigate the impact of rising temperatures and greenhouse gas emissions through a very aggressive adaptation of clean energy. This multifaceted approach includes investment in clean energy technologies, infrastructure, policy, technology innovations, and international collaborations. Just a few examples. China installed roughly as much solar panels as the rest of the world combined, and accounted for about 60% of global wind, and almost a quadruple addition of energy storage in the last couple of years. China is the largest market for electric vehicles. The number of new electric vehicle registrations reached 8 million in 2023, increasing by about 35% relatively to 2022. And China also set very aggressive policy goals to peak its emission by 2030. And it could actually achieve this goal several years earlier. And China also set to achieve net zero carbon emission by 2060, and it is on track to achieve that. And China's clean energy supply chain is also very critical to help other countries to achieve their goals, to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by providing low-cost and high-performance clean energy technologies such as solar panels and the lithium-ion batteries.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.